So now let's cover some Flutter specific questions. Now, these three, I would say you should definitely have a good handle on. We covered all three of these within the course, but I can almost promise you at least one of these will show up within your interview if you decide to interview for a Flutter related job. Now, state management, I give you 80, maybe even 90% chance that something about state management is going to come up during the interview. So that's the one I would try to make sure that you cover. But even these two, they come up so often because it's so integral to understanding how Flutter works. Like I said, we covered these in this course, so hopefully you have a good grasp on them. If not, refresh on them before you go into an interview. And then I wanted to do something fun with this part of the lesson. Hopefully a lot of you know what ChatGPT is. If you don't, it's kind of like an AI chatbot that you can talk to. I asked it to give me some Flutter interview questions, and we're going to go through all of them. So I asked it to give me 10 questions. The first one says, what is Flutter and how does it differ from other mobile development frameworks? So Flutter is an open source framework developed by Google and it allows you to natively compile to multiple platforms from one code base. So within that, I told you how it differs. So first, it compiles natively to every platform that you give it to. Second, it's open source. And the third big way it differs is it actually isn't just a mobile development framework. You can compile it for web, desktop, and Linux, and Windows, and Apple, and even embedded software. So that's how it differs. Next question is, how do you create a new Flutter project? Honestly, I don't know if this would show up in an interview because it's relatively easy, but you do Flutter, create, and then your project name. Can you explain the concept of widgets in Flutter? Now this one I feel like could definitely come up. It's kind of hard, but as long as you understand what widgets are, I think your explanation will do well. But how I would do it is I would say that widgets are everything in Flutter. Flutter is just an app of widgets. And the easiest way to kind of showcase a widget, I think, is by defining some UI widgets. So these are little pieces of code that you can write that define how it looks on your application and also how it acts within your application. So some common UI widgets are like a button or maybe a text field or maybe an app bar, things like that. So in general, widgets are little pieces of code that define how it looks and acts within your application. How do you handle state management in Flutter? Now, this will be different depending how you end up using state management, but the way we use it here with RiverPod is, well, you can say that we use RiverPod for our state management solution, and we handle it by giving it the data. Our RiverPod uses a state notifier, and that holds the state of our application, and we can interact with it by the functions within that state notifier, and we can only call those within that one file. So all our state is managed within one file. So if everything goes wrong, we know that we can go look into that file on how the data is getting mixed up. Can you discuss the difference between stateless and stateful widgets? So it's kind of in the name. The stateless widgets do not hold state, and stateful widgets do hold state. So you can imagine something that doesn't hold state is just a piece of text that you're trying to display, or maybe an image, something that doesn't hold any state within your application. But a stateful widget depends on the piece of state that is within it. So maybe it's some sort of counter that whenever you click a button, that counter changes and it gets incremented. So stateful widgets can be interacted with and the state can be manipulated to change how it acts and looks, while a stateless widget doesn't have any state, it's just there. How do you handle navigation in a Flutter app? So navigation within a Flutter app is a stack of screens. Now you can either push something onto that stack and that'll become what you see, or you can pop something off of the stack and you'll see something below it. How do you handle user input in Flutter application? There's many different types of user input. For example, there's a text user input. For that, you would use something like a text field widget or a text form field widget. There's sliders and toggles and buttons and all those where each of them have their own specific interaction when you touch on them. Or if you want something more custom, you can use a gesture detector where you can define it around any widget within the screen. And when you touch it or tap it or hold it, different things can happen depending on that. This is a very individual question, but can you discuss a time when you faced a challenging problem while developing a Flutter app and how you solved it? The next question is, how do you keep up with the latest developments and updates with the Flutter framework? Well, for me, personally, I actually like to see their YouTube channel. They have a pretty active YouTube channel, and whenever new things come up, they definitely update it on there. But you can also keep up with them on Twitter. Go to flutter.dev all these places are good answers for this. The last question ChatGPT gave me is, how do you implement Firebase with a Flutter application? So first, you need to import the package for Firebase core, and then whatever part of the Firebase application you want to use. So maybe the database, maybe storing something, maybe authentication. You need to import that package as well. Then there's a Firebase CLI that you can use, which does all the setup of the actual Android files and the iOS files for your Flutter app to work properly. And then we need to initialize whatever part of the Firebase we're using, whether it's database or authentication or whatnot. And then lastly, ChatGPT put a good note here at the bottom that I thought I would also include, is that it's important to keep in mind that the actual questions may vary on the company, the role, and the level of the position. So these are just some of the questions. If you're actively interviewing, I recommend you Google Flutter interview questions and make sure you can answer a lot of those, and hopefully you will do well.